In this lesson, we're going to learn how to factor by grouping. And to do this, we're going to review greatest common factor. And then we're going to also look at how to factor binomials using the greatest common factor method. And then after that, we will examine the steps to factor by grouping. And then we're going to walk through some examples together. So let's look at the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor of two terms is the largest monomial, or is the largest term that divides into each of the terms without a remainder. For example, the greatest common factor of 3x squared minus 12xy is 3x. You may ask, how is that possible? So let's go ahead and show you how it works. 3x squared is the same as 3 multiplied by x multiplied by x. 12xy is the same as 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by x multiplied by y. So now your greatest common factor is going to be the terms that appear for both of them. So let's look at 3 here, and then we look at x. So now greatest common factor is going to be 3 multiplied by x, which is equal to 3x. That's how you get that greatest common factor. Now we're going to learn how to factor binomials using the greatest common factor method. So factoring binomials using the greatest common factor method requires dividing each term by the greatest common factor and writing an expression as a product of the greatest common factor and its factors. Okay, so all this is simply saying is, for example, 6xy is equal to 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by x multiplied by y. And then 12x is going to be 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by x. So now what we're going to do here is to find the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is going to be the term that appears for 6xy and 12x. So we can see there's a 2 for 6xy, there's a 2 for 12x. There's also a 3 for 6xy and a 3 for 12x. What else? We have an x for 6xy and another x for 12x. So now what is the greatest common factor? That's going to give us 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by x, which is going to give you 6x. So now we found the greatest common factor. Now we want to write this as a product of, we want to factor this. So what we're going to do is write this as a product of the greatest common factor and its factors. So now 6xy plus 12x, we have a greatest common factor of 6x, and then what's the other factor for 6xy? It's going to be y. Now for 12x, the other factor is going to be 2, so plus 2. So that is why the greatest common factor of 6xy is 6x, and then we have a factor of y plus 2. So 6xy plus 12x is the same as 6x multiplied by y plus 2. So now let's go ahead and look at the steps we follow to factor by grouping. So we want to first rewrite the expression such that each term has a factor and a greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is the GCF. We want to identify the GCF, and then we want to combine the other terms that are not part of the GCF. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Here we're going to group this right here. Group these two terms together. Okay. So 3x and 3y. So I'm going to show you how to break this up just so that you understand. And the more you do this, it becomes easier for you to actually just spot check and then select your greatest common factor. So 3x and then 3y. This is going to give you 3 multiplied by x. This is going to give you 3 multiplied by y. So you can see here that the greatest common factor is 3 because only 3 appears for both of them. So what we're going to now have is 3 is our greatest common factor. Now, when you have 3 for 3x, what's left over? We have x is left over. When you have 3y, what's left over? You have y is left over. Okay, now let's look at x, y, and y squared. So xy is x multiplied by y squared is y multiplied by y. What is the term that appears for both of them? Just y. So we have plus, y is our greatest common factor here, and then we have x plus y. So now we have a situation where we have created two sets of terms, and you can see that x plus y also becomes the greatest common factor of these two terms. So x plus y is our greatest common factor, and the other factors are 3 and plus y. So this is what we're trying to do here. Alright, let's try another example. So this one is a little bit easier to do because you have already found your greatest common factor as b plus 5. So b plus 5 is our greatest common factor here. And then what are the other factors? 2x and negative 3y. So that's what you do here. And then the next one here we have 4x, 6x plus 1. And then minus 1 minus 6x. So you have two different choices here. So if you look at this, let's do a few things here. Let's look at negative of 6x plus 1, which is going to give us negative 6x minus 1, which is also the same as minus 1 minus 6x. Okay? Alright. The other one we're going to do here is negative 1 minus 6x. Let's put a negative sign outside of it. It's going to give us 1 plus 6x, which is the same as, which is equal to 6x plus 1. Alright, so what we're seeing here is, I'm going to use 6x plus 1 here because I just like it's easier to work with them when you have a positive value as the coefficient of x. It doesn't matter for the constant. But here you have negative, negative. It just looks clumsy. So I like to use this one here, which is 6x plus 1. So what I'm going to now do is, we have 4x, 6x plus 1, plus 3, and then we have minus 1 minus 6x multiplied by negative 1. Okay? So now what I'm going to now rewrite this as is 4x, 6x plus 1, and then that negative 1 comes over here to 3, minus 3, and then we have 6x plus 1. So now we have a greatest common factor, which is 6x plus 1 right here. And then we're going to have 6x plus 1 as our greatest common factor, and the other factors are 4x minus 3. So that's that. And then final example, we have the same situation here. We can either have x minus 3, so x minus 3. If I put a negative sign out here, I have negative x plus 3, which is the same as 3 minus x. So you can see that here. And then if I go to 3 minus x, 3 minus x, if I put a negative sign out here, it's going to give me negative 3 plus x, which is the same as x minus 3. So you can see that all we're looking for here is where would you want to put the negative sign? I am fine with putting the negative sign here. Actually, let's go ahead and put the negative sign here. Okay, so I'm going to show you two different ways of doing this. So negative sign here. If I put a negative sign in front of this, I now have negative 7b of x minus 3 minus 3p x minus 3. And then what we're going to do is we now have our greatest common factor as x minus 3. So x minus 3 then we have negative 7b minus 3p. Or you can actually rewrite this as negative of x minus 3, 7b plus 3p. So that's one way. The other way you can write this is use 3 minus x as what we're going to aim for as the greatest common factor. So now we have, in this case, we have 7b, and then we have 3 minus x, and then we have minus 3p, x minus 3, and then we're going to multiply x minus 3 by negative 1. So now we're going to end up with 7b, 3 minus x. This negative 1 is going to apply to negative 3p, so that's going to be plus 3p, and then we have 3 minus x. So what we end up with is 3 minus x is going to be our greatest common factor. So 3 minus x is our greatest common factor, and then the other factors are 7b and 3p. So you can see that these actually are the same thing, because if you multiply the negative into x minus 3, you're going to get 3 minus x. This to me is cleaner than this one, but they're both acceptable answers.